Hey, this is Enaa, and with you in the fight back. And I got a couple requests or comments about if I had read the work of Edward Said, particularly his work Orientalism, which is his most influential work. And I have, and it's actually one of the bigger influences on my thought and practice as a historian and activist. Because Edward Said is just a really insightful thinker. And if you don't know who Edward Said is, he was born in 1935 in what was then the British Mandate of Palestine, and he died in 2003, I believe, in New York. He was a literary critic. He was a professor at Columbia University, I believe, and he was a very vocal advocate for the Palestinian cause. And he's written many works, many essays, all of which are worth checking out. But Orientalism is his big work. It was written in the mid-70s. It was an important piece of post-colonial thinking. And there are certain drawbacks to Orientalism and its argument, but in general, it holds up, I think. And Said, he's looking at like the construction of the other. It's how I've always looked at this work. And it's more than it's not, when he looks at imperialism, as opposed to say how Lenin would look at imperialism, he's not looking so much at the economics, but rather at the culture, the literature of it. And Orientalism is looking at pretty much how the Western Europe, particularly France and England, and to a certain extent the United States as well, from North America, how they view the East, particularly the Middle East. And he looks at thinkers going back to pretty much the foundation of Islam until the present, and he looks at how these thinkers, these writers, these scholars, even state officials are constructing how they view the Orient, the East. And they create like a distorted view of the other. They're perceived as weaker, they're not in control of their emotions, they're irrational, and they're exotic, and they project these views that they've developed through their research onto the other, and they have those views speak back to them. And it's a way to justify control, it's a way to justify hatred or fear of the other. And Said looks at thinkers, from Dante to Karl Marx, and how they've fit into this whole Orientalist framework. And the body of work constructed, for instance, Napoleon's expedition to Egypt, that helps construct these Oriental views. It's a way to justify, in many senses, colonial and imperial domination. And it's showing very much how culture, how literature plays its part. Many of these writers and scholars were not necessarily in the employ of imperial powers. Some of them were, but how they represent Arabs or the Orient as non-civilized, childlike, or in other ways, otherwise a degrading manner. But some states, for instance, Germany, France, they've had schools of the Orient that produce studies that help with domination. And this has, of course, been seen in the United States, especially after World War II, and how they viewed the Orient. In many senses, I think that Said kind of overstates his case, and he's looking at such a broad canvas that I think he's maybe attributing to some of these people views that I don't really think hold up. And just to give the most obvious example is Karl Marx, who he thinks is internalizing a lot of this Orientalist framework. The Arab or the Easterners can't develop, and especially Marx's writings on India, they need English colonialism. But if you actually read what Marx wrote on India, and especially in the latest work on this thought, Marx at the Margins by Kevin Anderson, it pretty much debunks a lot of that. So Said's argument's got some flaws, but in the way Said is looking at how these writers and scholars, these statesmen are using this whole Orientalist mindset to look at the other, it's very valuable. And something that really comes up with this is Said is looking how the West views the Arab world, but largely in many ways, it's actually possible to look at how, say, the English view the Irish, or how whites view the blacks, or something like that. This whole idea of Orientalism, Said's whole method, isn't just limited. It can be applied in a vast number of different circumstances. Most of my use of Said's work has actually been on how the English view the Irish, and eventually I'll post an essay and video dealing with that later. But it's a great work. It's, like I said, it's got some problems, but it really looks at how these ideas of the Orient have been constructed, and how the West or colonial powers have used them to support their domination. And as such, it's a great read. So I highly recommend Said's work. Until next time.